Tan Wee Soon. He is the Singapore Money Laundering Reporting Officer for DBS Singapore. He also heads the Financial Advisory and Security Services team responsible for Institutional Banking Group of DBS. Prior to joining DBS, he held several regional and local anti-financial crime roles at Deutsche Bank in Singapore, Hong Kong, and China. Wee Soon began his compliance career with UBS in Singapore. Prior to joining UBS, he was also a deputy public prosecutor with the Attorney General's Chambers, where he handled financial crime-related prosecutions and was involved in the FATF Mutual Evaluation of Singapore. He's also admitted as an advocate and solicitor of the Supreme Court of Singapore. We're very lucky to have him with us here this morning. For the next 30 minutes, he's going to be talking about the increasing importance of managing identity. Please join me in welcoming Tan Wee Soon.
Good morning, everyone. I want to basically thank the managing directors and of course the chairperson of BIIA to invite me to speak at this very important conference. I am acutely aware that as the first session on a Friday morning, I have to double up my efforts to make everyone engaged and involved. I try to do that. And of course, if you have heard my background, you will know that giving the disclaimer about how what I'm going to share is my personal view and does not represent the official views of my employers of current or former. So given that as you can tell, I have a legal training, disclaimer will not sit very strangely with me. So I appreciate all that consideration. So as I've said, I'm actually very honored to be here. And when Joe and Jane approached me some months back to ask me to give a keynote speech and to also share my perspective with the industry as to how we should manage identity and also deal with the compliance challenges and perhaps share my perspective to help all of you plot the way forward. To be honest, I did feel a bit of trepidation, because I see in this room a wealth of experience from various industries, decades of experience. So what I will try to do is to actually share my perspective as a banking compliance professional. And I hope that through my sharing, you will draw the necessary inspiration for you to take home for this conference. As someone who has actually worked in compliance for close to about 2 decades now, I have seen firsthand how the fast change of the regulations and also how the financial services industry has actually evolved over the past decade especially. The pace is what I would say is blistering and unrelenting. And I will say that this rate of change is going to continue unabated. I have been asked to speak to all of you about the current and potential regulatory trends that may affect the financial services industry. And because the focus of this conference is on managing identity, I will touch on what I call the 3 pillars of financial crime compliance, namely customer due diligence, CDD for short, or KYC, know your customer, although in practice it has been said that sometimes some of the financial institutions, the kind of obligations they impose on their customers feels like more like kill your customers with queries, documentation, and so on and so forth. But let it be known that the official elaboration is actually know your customers. And I'll talk about screening against lists and also bad actors, and last but not least, transaction monitoring. What I'll also do is that I'll also touch on specific themes that has emerged over the past few years, areas of regulatory concerns and interests, and because that is where hopefully you could gain some insights and inspirations for your relevant business. Now, as I've said, right, this financial service industry is one of the actually most heavily regulated industries in the world. Now, that translates into very, very complex laws and regulations, right, which for the uninitiated, right, and uninformed can actually prove to be very daunting, and in cases of non-compliance, very detrimental to their career or health. Yeah. I'm not one, to be honest, to complain about it because that regulation has actually given rise to my employment. So I really can't complain about that. But jokes aside, right, I want to draw your attention to a particular quote that has actually been attributed to a former US Deputy Attorney General, Paul McNulty, which actually sums up neatly what the mood has been and will be, I think, for the past 10 years and going forward, and which has been, if I may say so, gleefully used by many compliance officers. I may be one of the guilty party. Now, this particular former Attorney General said, if you think compliance is expensive, try non-compliance. Yeah. So I've used it, I must say, maybe a couple of times because and allow me to indulge in a bit of German. It's a bit of like a Schadenfreude, which is like finally, you know, there is some joy in understanding that at least the burden has come to bear on some people who weren't paying attention to these regulations. But again, looking at what the statement means, the statement is actually very interesting in a few aspects. The obvious intent by this former Assistant Attorney General is actually to highlight the overarching expectation of his office that compliance with the relevant regulations and rules, they are non-negotiable and cannot be cited as an excuse not to comply. But having said that, right, the other implicit statement that has been made is that there is an acknowledgement that compliance costs can be very considerable. It is a huge amount that financial institutions spend to basically ensure that they are on the right side of the law. So this calls for a very targeted investment in this particular area. And the role of data is very, very crucial for financial institutions to actually discharge their obligations. Because of all these regulations and expectations, the financial industry as a whole must make appropriate investments to fulfill its regulatory obligations, especially in the areas of anti-money laundering, AML, countering of terrorism financing, CFT, and also proliferation financing, which in recent years has actually grown in prominence because of certain rogue states that insist on enriching their nuclear, biological, and chemical capabilities. So other than a legal perspective, I actually submit that the financial service industry, in fact, everyone, by and large, right, has an obligation to do this because everyone has a party to do good and to also play a role in combating illicit fund flows. I'll share an interesting snippet about myself in the sense that my first foray into countering of terrorism financing was not when I was a prosecutor, when I handled terrorism financing cases. Neither was it actually I think in my banking industry, but rather it started when I was 19 years old. And this is, for some of you who are aware, all Singaporean males have this sacred duty to be conscripted for 2.5 years to do national service. For some reason, I was actually selected to join the explosive ordnance disposal, which colloquially people know then as a bomb squad. So I've actually known counter-terrorism much, much earlier, even before I became a prosecutor and before I actually became a compliance officer. Now, what this actually gives me is a certain perspective about how you combat illicit activities. We are all part of the equation. Everyone has to do their part to actually combat illicit behavior. It could be in the way of you prosecuting bad actors. It could be a FI, financial institutions. having controls to detect those activities, and it also could be just any law enforcement officers who's responding to bomb threats, bomb hooks, and so on and so forth. No one is better than others. In order for this to work, the entire ecosystem must come together. So what has happened, obviously, in the financial service industry is that the focus has been on financial institution. But if you take a step back, the obligation to deter this actually affects everyone, including everyone who's seated here. So that's a bit of a snippet about how I think maybe I'm destined to do what I'm doing now. Yeah. And what actually this also means is that while we need to discharge all these obligations, there is a recognition that unfortunately nobody has unlimited war chest. Everyone has to make actually very targeted investments. This is not some computer game where you turn on the God mode, right? And you can expend any bullets and you kill off all the monsters as required. In the real world, right, there are budgets and there are competing interests. So it actually behoves any institution or organization to actually use their investment very, very, very carefully. So this is where the financial institution has to basically look at the ways it's investing its capabilities and balancing the need not to adopt an overly conservative risk appetite that leads to de-risking and which may also lead to the inadvertent effect of financial exclusion. Now, for those of you who's wondering, I have not forgotten what the conference is about. Now, so where does data come into all this? So it's everything and anything. It has been said that data is the new oil, the new gold, and the new air. So you can't do without it. And I'll come back to this theme about data being a new oil again and again. To flesh this out, I've said our focus on three processes. KYC, remember, is know your customer, not kill your customer. Yeah? Screening, and also transaction monitoring. So just to give a background, as part of its AML obligations, financial institutions are expected to perform checks to actually identify and verify your customer's identity and to ensure that that customer's data is up to date and relevant. This can include identifying and corroborating the customer's source of wealth and source of fund. Now, this much is actually very straightforward. Now, the difficulty comes when it actually requires collection of large amount of data, which may not be structured, or rather may or may not be structured or even meaningful. It's also largely documentary-based, so it poses a lot of challenge in regards to record keeping. Significant resources are also devoted to review the onboarding of customers and to also perform periodic reviews and trigger reviews. And completion status is actually being monitored very closely at all levels, be it at the operational level, at the management level, or the board level, and of course by our regulators and auditors. Backlog issues are treated very seriously because it reflects that the institution's processes and controls are either inadequate or sufficient. And the other flip side is that if you have to do frequent or repeated or ill-thought-of outreach to customers, it will also affect your customer journey and also affect your customer experience. To compound the issues, the practices across the industry can actually vary because of the overlays and the interconnectivity or the interplay of parent group or home regulatory environments. Now, so in this regard, over the past few years, there has been a number of common KYC utilities that have been developed in various parts of the world with, of course, varying degree of successes. The idea that financial institutions and customers can benefit from certain efficiency gain is again not in dispute. It is the materiality of the cost savings and efficiency gains that will affect how successfully a KYC utility is being adopted. Now, for this to work, it requires a certain skill so that there is benefit for a customer or financial institution to use the utility. I've actually had the chance to speak to treasury departments of quite a number of multinational corporations. Every time they have to change account authorized signatories, will require a signature on 100 over documents. There is certainly ways to actually improve efficiency in this regard. Now, there is also a shift towards the use of APIs to actually allow financial institutions to connect directly with government database, such as the MyInfo in Singapore, or third-party service providers to simplify the KYC process. So in various countries, in China and Singapore and even India, you will know that it's possible for you to actually open a bank account without having actually to set foot in a physical branch or to submit additional documents. Now, in this aspect, the ease of obtaining accurate and reliable data provides reasonable assurance that the financial institution concerned is not onboarding bad actors and enhances the processes for all enhanced. Now, one area in this Know Your Customer journey that I believe is worth looking at, and which actually is one that besets all financial institutions, is the issue about corroborating the source of wealth for higher risk customers. Right now, a lot of time is actually spent by financial institutions to actually request from the customers paperwork or proof or public domain search to corroborate the customer's source of wealth, to see whether the customer is as rich as he seems to be. There is actually a fair bit of room for actually enhancement to be made in this area, and it's certainly something that for those of you who are interested, could consider exploring. Now, I will then move into the next topic of screening. Now, screening is a requirement that is actually imposed by many regulators. This is meant for the financial institutions to actually detect bad actors and at the point of onboarding and also as an ongoing process. Now, the expectation is to actually have a comprehensive database that covers all the relevant lists and to actually be able to detect such bad actors promptly. Now, apart from sanction lists, the screening process is also meant to assist the financial institutions to identify entities posing higher potential risks, such as politically exposed persons or those with adverse news. Typically, the sources are actually derived from lists managed by the government or commercial service providers. An area of the focus in this regard is to address the high volume of alerts with false positives, and this is actually due to a combination of factors due to matching algorithm and the lack of accompanying details to actually assist the financial institution to disambiguate the hits. This is a particular acute problem in populous countries where you have many common names, where a single name will actually throw up hundreds of hits. So this is where reaching out to the customers to seek additional information may not use useful information, especially if the hits relates to the customer's counterparties. And then there are further complexities when you consider the use of non-Latin characters or Romanized names. And effective screening presupposes the existence of a comprehensive and accurate database that's updated on a timely basis. Now, in practice, and unfortunately I've seen quite a fair bit of that, lapses can occur when there's transposition errors or omissions due to manual nature of the list updates, or where the channels for screening or feedback have not been activated, or simply when the feeds purchased or obtained do not contain the full suite of names that the financial institution is expected to screen against. Now, due to the need to perform screening on a periodic basis, there is also a issue of duplicative hits arising from minor profile changes. Now, in this regard, what I can share is that financial institutions are beginning to use tools to identify additional source of information to help them disambiguate the hits. For example, collating information about the entities to be screened from public domain, social network analysis, and also apply artificial intelligence method, such as natural language processing, to handle the large quantity of data. Machine learning is also being explored in a bid to actually identify true hits more accurately. The other area that is also worth highlighting that I mentioned earlier is the area of transaction monitoring. To basically give some background as to why FIs, financial institutions, perform transaction monitoring, this is a process that's key to detecting unusual behaviors of customers or counterparty, to assess the legitimacy of such acts or conduct via investigation or customer request for information, and to file a suspicious transaction report. Now, it is an important process to detect suspicious activities and to report such activities to authorities. Indeed, if you fail to do so, you can be subject to very onerous penalties. Now, to operationalize the requirements to detect this, most financial institution systems rely on prescribed thresholds and scenarios and compare that with the financial institution's knowledge of the customer's profile. Transaction monitoring and customer due diligence, as you will appreciate by now, are inextricably linked. The feedback from the industry is that there is also, similarly to name screening alerts, a large volume of alerts generated with very low conversion yields. Similar to CDD and screening hits, it's also prone to backlogs, and you require a not insignificant number of analysts to actually review the hits. To join up the different systems that's required to perform transaction monitoring, especially in an environment with legacy system, is also a very, very challenging and nightmarish experience for some, and ruinously expensive. Now, this is one of the areas where FIs are also deploying machine learning and artificial intelligence, such as social network and natural language processing, to enhance the yield. The MAS, my home regulator, recently issued a paper on shell companies and showcased a number of banks that have actually used artificial intelligence to detect networks through the application of network analysis. Closer collaboration between the regulators and also the financial institution has also meant that there are more information to share or more seats for the FIs to work on. Now, over the past decade or so, now that I've described the basic processes, right, there has been valid question that's been raised about the effectiveness of the additional measures introduced in these three areas. And these are valid questions, and whether they are actually effective in deterring financial crime. Regardless of the position that one may take, you can't deny the fact that financial institutions have invested substantially in these areas and will continue to do so. And the data capability of these areas and the need for the data will continue to increase. And this is where I believe that for the years to come, this will present unique opportunities for those of you in the business information industry to seize upon and to take advantage of those opportunities. I would submit that for those of you who are in the business information industry, you are well equipped to handle this, because, especially those in the credit information bureau, because this industry is an expert on, and the familiarity and the sensitivity to the data, the appreciation of the value of data and the handling of data comes very naturally to this industry. The industry should take note of the premium of some financial institutions on connectivity and customization, and to be able to share information seamlessly via APIs. So I believe that perhaps gone are the days where a provider can go to a financial institution and say, this is my solution, you will have to accept this. Now you will see more and more financial institutions asking you to build an API so that the information can flow directly into the financial institution system. The industry should also, I will submit, take note of certain developing themes in the industry and the broader consideration which may offer new collaborative opportunities. And I'll go through some examples, and hopefully that will provide some inspiration. Now, in the area of data analytics, which I've actually alluded to earlier, these are being increasingly applied in the compliance and financial crime areas. And regulators such as the Monetary Authority of Singapore actively endorse such an approach. Now, I've said that I made the point about data being the new oil. So it is also apt for me to use extractive industry terminology. upstream and downstream. So in the upstream sense, it is the step that's involved from preliminary exploration through the extraction of the resource, and compare that to downstream, which is the production phase to the point of sale. Now, using the upstream analogy, the business information industry, I submit, can consider the new types of reasonable sources of information that it can collect to allow financial institutions to perform their duties better. Now, again, this is not a novel area for your industry, seeing that how credit scores such as FICO were derived in the past through the identification of different data sources. From a downstream perspective, data and information that are used for a particular purpose can be extrapolated and extended to other areas. Now, a good example of this would be the expansion of the use of credit information, credit bureau checks. Credit bureau checks are now used by financial institutions to actually conduct background screening. So it's no longer just restricted to a credit score of a particular individual. This is the kind of downstream impact that the industry will do well to see whether they can expand the use of specific data. This specific downstream expansion can be also seen particularly in the area of trade finance, which is actually a growing area of focus these past few years. The traditional focus on trade finance controls tends to be fraud and credit risk related. In recent years, due to the renewed regulatory interest in this area, it has also been expanded into a trade-based money laundering perspective to address sanctions and also proliferation financing. The notable challenges in these areas, which you could see as challenge, or it could offer some valuable business opportunities, would be if someone could actually offer solution as to the determination of the dual-use goods, which is a focus on many regulators' radar. How do you detect goods can be used for both a civilian and a military purposes when there's actually no such comprehensive list available? The other area that is also of focus in the trade finance space is the requirement for banks to actually perform price checks, which is somewhat easier when you deal with commodities, but not so easy when you deal with non-commodities where the price range can vary very widely. Take a watch, for example. So these are some of the areas that are emerging areas, and true to form, some of the wider industry developments, such as port operators, PSA, trying to develop a SWIFT-like standards to digitize trade, and also the use of blockchain in the case of a project called TradeLens, which is led by IBM and MERS, offer plenty of opportunities to think about and to mull over as well. So while it manages the challenges and the opportunities today, I will submit that the business information industry will do very well to watch how horizon developments will pan out, because they will shape your industry engagement with your client in time to come. Now, there is another new area which I'll touch on, which I believe you would have not evaded your attention. Areas in the area of virtual assets, more commonly known by others like cryptocurrencies. Now, it has generated interest from many parties, and some benign and some not so benign. Now, virtual assets has been in vogue in recent years, especially at one point in time. You look at Bitcoin, it hit a dizzying height of about $20,000. It has since gone down a bit, but there's still a fair bit of interest. Now, when it comes to this area, the financial industry would have to grapple with new players in the virtual asset space. And in doing so, when it establishes KYC or customer due diligence, you cannot simply pour old wine into new wineskin, because the verification of identity cannot simply be fulfilled in the blockchain space by collecting government-issued documents as in the traditional case of customer due diligence. Contrary to popular belief, Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies are technically not anonymous, but they're pseudonymous. The sending and receiving of Bitcoins and other currencies can be linked to specific addresses. Now, the challenge is to identify those addresses and to associate those addresses with actual people and entity. The Financial Action Task Force has issued guidance on this, the latest one being June 2019. Concepts of AML, KYC, and transaction monitoring are applied in this space with adaptations necessary for blockchain. The travel rule, which is embodiment of FATF Recommendation 16, which is in a SWIFT context, sending originator or beneficiary information in wire transfer, will have to be customized and adapted to the blockchain and the virtual asset space, which right now the virtual assets players are actually struggling to see how they can comply with these particular rules. Now, all this have presented opportunities for certain information providers to support players in this space to comply with the relevant obligations. Now, I will conclude by just also returning to the point about data being the new oil. There is a huge focus on privacy, and you will see that the tension between privacy and other obligations will continue to play out in the years to come. A data leakage or compromise will be as calamitous as oil spill. No effort should be spared to protect and to ensure the integrity of the data. You will find that your clients and users will place great value in the way you manage and protect your data, especially in this day and age where people are getting more and more sensitive about the way that their data are being managed, even though there has been a traditional preference to exchange privacy for services in some regions. My organizations employ a pure framework in this regard: purposeful, unsurprising, respectful, and explainable, to oversee the responsible use of data that's entrusted to us. Trust is very integral to banking, and your ability to safeguard the data in your possession will stand you in good stead. An information provider engaging in upstream activities to identify additional information sources to facilitate an evaluation should bear in mind that with the advent of technology and the ubiquitous of smartphones, and I know of providers who claims that they can harvest 10,000 data points from your smartphone to evaluate your creditworthiness. There are, of course, technological means to extract data points for you to form a certain assessment or profile of the user. However, and I'll leave you with this, that we should all know that one should not be responsible in the way he or she uses the data, but also in the way he or she harvests the data. With that, I thank you. Yeah.